Nobody remembers the moment they get underestimated. They remember the moment they realized how much it was going to cost the other person. I walked into that office on a Monday morning wearing the same blazer I'd worn to 100 meetings before, except this time nobody in the building knew what I actually did for a living. No title badge. No introduction email sent ahead. Just a name on a temporary access card that said Sarah Bennett, Junior Coordinator, because that was the only way I was ever going to see how this place really worked. Gregory Voss didn't even stand up when I reached his office door. He glanced at me over his monitor, the kind of glance that takes less than a second and somehow tells you everything about how someone ranks you before you've said a word. New hire, he said, not a question. Starting today, I said. He waved me toward an empty desk near the printer, the one nobody wanted because the drawer stuck and the chair wobbled. You'll figure out where things are, he said. Everyone starts somewhere. You'll learn how things work here eventually. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain that I had been reviewing his department's contracts for 6 weeks before I ever set foot on that floor, or that the badge in my pocket could unlock doors his couldn't. I just nodded, sat down at the desk with the sticking drawer, and opened my laptop. My phone buzzed once in my bag, a message I didn't check, not yet. Gregory had already turned back to his screen, already forgotten I existed, exactly the way he forgot about everyone he decided didn't matter. He had no idea that decision was the first mistake on a list that was about to get very long. The Monday meeting started the way most did, with Gregory standing at the head of the table clicking through a slide deck nobody had asked for. I had submitted a proposal the week before, a simple change to how we tracked vendor approvals, something that would have saved the department 2 days of paperwork every month. He pulled it up on the screen without looking at me first. This came across my desk, he said, tapping the slide. I want to be clear, that is not how decisions get made here. A few people around the table glanced at me. Someone near the end let out a short laugh, more reflex than anything, the kind people do when they are relieved they are not the one being singled out. I kept my eyes on my notebook and wrote the date at the top of a new page. I did not look up. Gregory kept going, explaining why the process had worked fine for 6 years and did not need input from, and here he paused just long enough to make the pause mean something, people who had not been here that long. I asked him one question. I asked if he had reviewed the numbers I attached, the ones showing the time saved. He said he had glanced at it. He had not glanced at it. I could tell by the way he moved to the next slide without answering. Then he said it, almost as an aside, like it cost him nothing. People like you are easy to replace around here. There is always someone new coming in with ideas. Nobody in the room reacted much. That was the part that stayed with me longer than the comment itself, how ordinary it sounded to everyone else. I closed my notebook and reached for my badge to scan out for lunch. That was when the side door opened and a man in a gray suit walked in without knocking, a folder under his arm, and stopped just inside the doorway. He looked at Gregory for a moment too long before he said anything, like he had heard the last thing Gregory said and was deciding whether to mention it. He said nothing that day, just set the folder on the credenza near the door and slipped out as quietly as he had come in. Gregory did not acknowledge him at all, already moving on to the next agenda item like nothing had happened. I filed the moment away and did not think about it again until Thursday. The quarterly vendor presentation was mine. I had built the deck myself, pulled the numbers, rehearsed the timing twice over the weekend on my own laptop. Gregory called me into his office that morning, door open, and told me to sit. I am giving the presentation to Danny instead, he said, not looking up from his monitor. I need someone more capable representing this department in front of regional leadership. Danny had been with the company 4 months. I asked, carefully, if there was something wrong with the material I had prepared. Gregory said no, the material was fine, this was about optics. I did not push further. There is a version of yourself you learn to protect at work, and mine stayed quiet and went back to my desk. Danny presented that afternoon. He mixed up 2 vendor contracts on slide 6 and could not answer a basic question about renewal terms when regional asked. I watched from the back of the room, my own notes still open on my laptop, and used. Afterward, Gregory stopped me in the hallway by the elevators. "That presentation reflected poorly on the department," he said. "I am putting together a written warning. Consider this your notice, keep this up and you will not last here much longer." I told him I had not given the presentation. He said my name was still on the department, and that made it my responsibility either way. I did not argue. I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and started writing down the date, the time, and exactly what he had said, word for word, while it was still fresh. That evening, as I was packing up, the man in the gray suit appeared again, this time stopping right at my desk instead of walking past. He glanced toward Gregory's office, then back at me, and lowered his voice just enough that no one else would hear. "You know you do not have to sit through this, right?" he said. I did not answer him right away. I told him I appreciated it, closed my laptop, and left before he could say anything else. I did not know his name yet, only that he seemed to notice things other people in that office chose not to. The following week, the department gathered for the annual contract renewal meeting, the one that set budgets and staffing for the next fiscal year. Gregory ran it the way he ran everything, standing, clicker in hand, moving fast through slides nobody had time to read. "We are still waiting on final sign-off," he said, clicking to a slide with a redacted line item. "The ownership group has not approved my new terms yet, so some of this is still provisional." Someone asked how long that usually took. Gregory shrugged and said it depended on who was reviewing it that quarter, and that ownership rarely explained their timeline to anyone below director level. I did not raise my hand. I did not need to. I just said, from my seat near the back, "It will get reviewed soon." Nobody reacted. Gregory barely paused before moving to the next slide. It was such a small thing to say, the kind of filler comment people make in meetings just to sound engaged, and it passed exactly like that, unnoticed, forgettable, folded into the next 15 minutes of budget talk. Near the end of the meeting, Gregory's phone buzzed once on the table, screen lighting up. He glanced down, and something in his posture changed, just slightly, shoulders pulling in. "Everything okay?" one of the directors asked. He did not answer. He turned the phone face down and moved on to the next slide. The email came at 4:40 on a Friday, a calendar invite with no subject line beyond Conference Room B, no agenda attached. I knew what it was before I opened it. Gregory had been building toward this for weeks, and Fridays were when people got told things they could not argue about until Monday. I walked in and he was already seated at the head of the table, a folder open in front of him, HR paperwork clipped at the corner, the kind with the acknowledgement line at the bottom that needs a signature. He did not ask me to sit. He gestured at the chair without looking up. "This is your last chance before termination," he said, sliding the paper across the table. "I have documented 3 instances this quarter alone. Attendance, performance, insubordination in front of leadership. Sign at the bottom acknowledging you have received this." I did not reach for the pen. I sat back and looked at him for a moment before I spoke. "Before you continue," I said, "there is something you should know." He cut me off before I finished the sentence, holding up a hand like he was stopping traffic. "Save it," he said. "I have heard every version of this speech. HR is not going to protect you this time, and honestly, at this point, neither am I. I have already spoken to legal about backfilling your position." I kept my hands folded on the table. I did not raise my voice, did not reach for the paper, did not give him anything to write down as further evidence of the behavior he was building his case around. I just watched him slide the pen closer to me, watched him check his watch like this was already finished in his mind. That was when the door opened without a knock, and the man in the gray suit stepped in, no folder this time, just his phone in one hand, his expression flat in a way that did not match the small talk tone he had used with me all week. "Gregory," he said, "we need to talk about the ownership review." Gregory looked up, and for the first time since I had walked into that office weeks earlier, something in his face shifted, the confidence dropping just slightly, like a man who had just heard a sound behind him he could not immediately place. Thomas did not sit down. He stood at the end of the table, phone still in hand, and looked between the two of us like he was deciding how much needed to be said out loud and how much had already answered itself. "I think you should know," he said, looking at Gregory now, "that Sarah is part of the ownership group that acquired this division last quarter. That review you have been waiting on, the one holding up your new terms, that came through her office." Gregory did not respond right away. He looked at the termination paperwork still sitting on the table between us, then at me, and I watched something behind his eyes try to rearrange every conversation we had ever had into a version that made sense. It did not. "That is not," he started, and stopped. "That cannot be right. She started here in March." I did not raise my voice. "I did not need to. I hold the majority stake in this department's parent contract," I said. "I have been reviewing operations since before I ever sat in on one of your team meetings." He looked at the folder in front of him, the one with my name typed at the top under 3 documented violations, and I watched him understand, slowly, exactly what that folder was going to look like to someone reviewing his conduct instead of mine. His hand moved slightly toward it, like he wanted to close it, put it away, undo the last 6 weeks in a single motion. "I want to be clear," Thomas said, "this is not a personnel matter anymore. Legal has already been looped in given the nature of the documentation involved." Gregory's jaw tightened. He looked at me the way people look at something they have been told is one shape and are now being asked to see as another, all at once, without time to adjust. "I am not going to pretend I do not understand why this is difficult to hear," I said. "But that is not why I am here today." Thomas glanced at me, then back at Gregory, and for the first time since he had walked into that room, he did not look like a man delivering bad news. He looked like a man waiting to see what came next. I reached into my bag and set my own folder on the table, opening it to the first tab. Inside were printed emails, a spreadsheet of dates, and copies of internal complaints filed through the company's anonymous HR portal over the last 8 months, the kind most employees assume disappear into a system nobody reads. "These are not mine," I said. "These were filed by 5 different people on this team before I ever started here in March. Attendance write-ups against people who were late because you scheduled 6 a.m. calls with no notice. A complaint about the vendor contract you signed without sending it through procurement. 2 write-ups against employees you later replaced with people you brought in from your last company." Gregory reached for the folder and I did not stop him, but Thomas spoke before he could say anything. "I want to be clear about what this is," Thomas said. "This is not opinion. Every item in that folder has already been reviewed by legal over the past 3 weeks. Documented conduct, dates, corroborating statements. This is not a conversation about whether it happened." Gregory pushed back from the table slightly, the chair scraping against the floor. "This is not how any of this works," he said. "You cannot just build a case against someone behind their back and spring it in a room like this. I have rights here. This is still an at-will state, but there are still processes." "There are," I said. "And they were followed. You were notified in writing 2 weeks ago that an internal review was underway. It went to your company email and to the portal you have access to. I can pull up the read receipt if that would help." He looked at Thomas, like he was hoping for a different answer from a different person in the room, and did not get one. "You cannot do this alone," Gregory said, his voice lower now, less certain. "This needs board approval. You do not have the authority to just walk in here and end someone's employment over a folder of complaints." I closed the folder in front of me and folded my hands on top of it. "I am not alone," I said. "The board already voted. Last Tuesday. 2 security badges were deactivated before Gregory even made it back to his desk, mine still active, his no longer working on the elevator panel when he tried to leave the floor. Thomas walked him out through the side stairwell instead, away from the open floor plan where 40 people pretended not to watch. By Thursday morning, an email went out from HR through the company-wide Slack channel, short and procedural. Gregory was on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. No details, no accusations spelled out, just enough for people to understand something had shifted. That was when the quiet broke. A woman named Priya from the vendor relations team stopped by my desk that afternoon, holding her laptop like she needed a reason to be standing there. "I heard you looked into the procurement stuff," she said. "I flagged that contract 8 months ago. Nobody ever told me what happened to it." "It went through legal," I said. "It's part of the record now." She nodded slowly, like she was recalculating something. Behind her, 2 other coordinators were talking near the printer in a way they hadn't before, not lowering their voices when people walked past. I called an all-staff meeting for Friday, kept it short. I stood at the front of the room, no slides, no folder this time. "Some of you know me as the new coordinator who started in March," I said. That was accurate, but incomplete. I'm the division head brought in to oversee this acquisition. I wanted to understand how this team actually operates before anyone knew who I was. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then a woman near the back, one of the newer hires who had barely spoken to me in 3 months, raised her hand halfway before speaking without waiting to be called on. "I didn't think anyone would believe us," she said. Her voice caught slightly on believe. "We filed those reports for a year. Nothing ever happened." I looked at her, then at the room full of people who had spent months adjusting their schedules, their words, their expectations around one man's temper. "It happened this time," I said. She didn't smile exactly, but something in her shoulders came down, like she'd been holding a weight she'd stopped noticing. What I didn't say in that meeting, what I hadn't told Thomas yet either, was that the investigation wasn't finished. Legal had found something in the vendor contract that went beyond a scheduling dispute, something that reached further than Gregory alone. I never told anyone what legal eventually found in that vendor contract, not the full extent of it, not in that meeting and not for weeks after. Some things take longer to close than a single Friday afternoon allows. But the part that mattered to the people on that floor was already settled, and settled in their favor. 3 weeks later I sat with Priya and 2 others from the team, going through what an updated review process would look like, actual anonymous channels that got read, actual follow-up timelines instead of a form disappearing into nothing. Priya asked me directly why I hadn't said anything sooner, why I let people assume I was just another new hire figuring out the copier. "If I'd walked in announcing who I was," I said, "I would have gotten the version of this place people build for someone with authority. I wanted to see the real one first." She thought about that for a second, then nodded like it made more sense than she expected it to. I've thought about that conversation a lot since. Being underestimated never felt like power in the moment. It felt like being unseen, like proof that people had already decided what I was worth before I opened my mouth. But sitting in that meeting, watching people speak up who hadn't felt safe enough to before, I understood it differently. Being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's information. It tells you exactly who you're dealing with, and exactly how they treat someone they think has no power at all. I still work with most of that team today. The culture didn't change because of one meeting or one folder of documents. It changed because people finally believed something would happen if they spoke up. If you have ever been underestimated at work, tell me in the comments, what did you wish you could have said in that moment?